Well, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here with you and to speak today to you and to share from the Word of God. This morning's scripture reading, as you can tell from it, we'll be talking about Zacchaeus this morning. And finish this sentence. So Zacchaeus was a little man. We hear that from a young age. And when I was a little kid, you can imagine I was a wee little man too. Some might say I still am. But this story was close to me. I really enjoyed this story. There's a lot from it. And so this morning we're going to try to learn what we can from it. So let's look at the background of the story and look at him first of all, what had happened. First of all, as we look at the scriptures here, before chapter 19, we see Jesus had just healed a blind man before coming to Jericho. So he was on his way there, and we see him come to Jericho. Now, Jericho is featured in another song too. Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. We all know that song probably too from when we were a child. Jericho is an interesting place because we know that the walls had come down and it had been cursed for a while to not be a good place. Nothing was to grow there. And actually, when they tried to rebuild there in the past, they were not successful. But this time, Jericho had been rebuilt, and actually under the Herods has become a place of trade, a center of trade at that time. So it's a very rich city. So as Jesus enters there, we find the character of Zacchaeus. Now Zacchaeus, the name, is a Jewish name, and it means pure. And because that name, people know that Zacchaeus originally was a Jew. But it turned his back on his people. A chief tax collector was not well liked in that time, and actually was treated the same thing as a leper. He was actually, if you're a chief tax collector at that time, you'd be excommunicated from the synagogue. You would not be allowed to go in. And in fact, people did not come to your house, just like a leper. They would try to avoid you at all costs. You can imagine this. They had to gather taxes for the Romans. But he wasn't just a tax collector, he was a chief tax collector. I don't know about you with your jobs, but sometimes we have the opportunity, when people don't like what we do, at least we can say, well, somebody else made me do it. Well, here, he was the chief tax collector. So he didn't have anybody else really to blame, because he was the guy that set what they were supposed to collect. So when the other tax collectors went to blame somebody, they would blame Zacchaeus. And so nobody around there would like him for this. It had probably been many months since anyone had willingly even entered Zacchaeus' house. So that's important as we go farther into the story. So we find Zacchaeus. He's a lonely man, probably a hated man. We find that he has curiosity here. Curiosity got the best of him. He decided, I want to know who Jesus is. I want to know who this gentleman is and know more about if he's real. If he's really the Son of God, like he says it. So we find the story here that he's short. And so because he's short, he has to find a way to see Jesus. Now, so this brings us to our first point this morning. God sees things differently. If we were looking for the person to go see in the town of Jericho, Zacchaeus would not be the person to see. Like I said, he was a hated person. He was a person no one else wanted to be around. But Jesus sees things differently. And so we see that he wants to get ahead so he can see Jesus. So he runs up ahead to try to find a way to see him. But he did something about it. How many times do we want something and sometimes we don't do anything about it? We complain, we grumble, and we find all the things in our way, instead of finding a way to make it happen. Well, Zacchaeus takes things in his own hands. He runs ahead of Jesus and finds a way to find him. So he runs ahead and he climbs up in the tree. Sometimes in our life, we find a situation like this too. We find that the crowd gets in our way. The crowd was in his way that day. Sometimes as we pursue Jesus, the crowd gets in our way. Sometimes we can't see him clearly. Think about that. Sometimes at work, maybe there's things where you're thinking about everything else going on, about those around you. So sometimes it's tough to seek and to really look for Jesus in your workplace. Maybe it's that way at school. Maybe it's that way just at home. Sometimes we get caught up in the different things going on around us, and it's tough to see and to really seek him. But Zacchaeus, because of this, he found a way around it. He ran ahead to seek Jesus. We have no record that Jesus was ever in Jericho before, which is kind of interesting that he would know where this tree is, that he would be looking up at this exact time to find Zacchaeus up in that tree. We find here that Jesus accepted Zacchaeus right off the bat. As I said, our first point this day is that Jesus looks at things different than we do. And we find that he accepts Zacchaeus. And that's a big point here, is that what has Zacchaeus done to earn any trust, any love from Jesus? The biggest thing, the only thing he's done is seek him. And that goes to a major point for us, is if we seek Jesus, he will seek us. If we seek Jesus, he will seek us. That's a bigger point than maybe what we're going to be able to get into this morning. But think about that. Anytime we're seeking him, he's going to be looking to seek us as well. And that's what happened here with Zacchaeus. So he was seeking him, and because of that, he was saved. So this morning, are we looking to be saved? Are we looking to seek Jesus? So Jesus looked at this situation differently. The second thing is, do we accept his way of thinking? We said he looks at it different. Look at the crowd around him. So you look at the verses. Let's look back here at Luke chapter 19. Let's look at verse 5. It says, and when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him, and he said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. So he made haste and came down and received him fully. And when they saw it, they all complained, saying, he has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner. So we see the crowd here once again not seeing things the way that Jesus saw them. They were grumbling. They ruined that moment. Have you ever had that moment that's just great and somebody else tries to ruin it? You do something really well, and then somebody says, well, I did something even better. Or, well, this was the case here. I know I'm a coach, and sometimes that happens when you win a game. Or win a big game, and they're like, their best player had the flu today. How does that make you feel afterwards? Like, well, great, thanks. That makes you feel good. Well, that's what the crowd does here. He's got this great opportunity. He has Jesus' attention, and what do? They start complaining about it. Sometimes I think we can find ourselves in the crowd, too. Maybe we're not Zacchaeus. Sometimes we're those people. Maybe we're the people that sometimes see that other side of things. We complain. We see, hey, what this person's past is, and we point that out to other people. We see here Zacchaeus being pointed out the first time that he is a sinner. It takes those people, the crowd, to point that out, which is interesting, because if anyone, it should have been Jesus that pointed that out, not the crowd, because they had all sinned. We all have sinned, but yet they pointed that out there. They called him a sinner for the first time. Sometimes we're the first to assume the worst of someone, and we find this in the crowd. So our point here today is we need to accept his way of thinking and don't be the crowd as we look at this story. So we looked at his way of thinking, not accepting, making sure that we accept that way of thinking. And the third is, are we ready for Jesus? We find here Zacchaeus. He's climbed up that tree. He got this recognition of Jesus. And the next thing that happens in the story is Jesus wants to come to his house. Let me ask you this morning, would you be ready for Jesus to come visit you today? And I'm not just talking about whether or not your house is clean. Because if you have children, that's not going to happen very often when your house is actually ready for Jesus to come over. But I'm talking about are things in order where you're ready for him to be in your life. Zacchaeus was. I've always wondered why Zacchaeus didn't fall out of the tree. Think about this. If you're in the tree and all of a sudden some man that doesn't know you at all calls your name, just out of blue, knows, hey, Zacchaeus, come down. I would just fall out of the tree. I'd be so shocked that he knew my name. It's not like Zacchaeus has some name tag on here or something. But we know about Jesus what? He knows his sheep by name. And that's why he knew Zacchaeus' name. So he gets called down. This isn't the only time this happens. Think about when other people have gotten called. Certain people were ready, certain people weren't. When Saul was called by Jesus, he was ready. He was ready, and he made a major change in his life. But others weren't. The rich young ruler, when he comes and talks to Jesus, and he comes to him asking for what he needs to do, and yet he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready for Jesus. But Zacchaeus was. It's interesting here as we look at the story. I've always wondered who he took with him, what apostles he took with him. I wonder if he took Matthew with him. Most of us know Matthew was a tax gatherer as well. And so it'd be interesting to see if he got that account from Matthew there to say, hey, this is what's happened in my life. Maybe Matthew would be able to tell him, hey, because of Jesus, my life has completely changed. And we don't know that, but it'd be interesting to see what would have happened. What discussions happened at Zacchaeus' house that day. So, are we ready for that? Are you ready for Jesus to come? Are you ready for him to be in your life? The next point for us to look at here is that when he does come, it creates a great change. Notice he does this cheerfully. We look back here at the verse. It says, when they saw it, verse 8, verse 6. So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. Joy is something we need to have. As Christians, we should be the happiest people in the world. And joy is something that we're lacking today. It's interesting, the number one silent killer among young people is suicide. Which is interesting. Why would young people commit suicide more than any others? And one of the reasons, it's among college students that this is happening. A lot of times we see them that there's an impotence, there's a fear of failure at that age. And a lot of times it's just a lack of joy people have when they're at that pivotal point in their life. And that's what leads to it. One star, they just produced a record-setting album. They sold 22 million, which was a record, which I don't know if that's saying much. It was in Canada. But they had set a record for how many they had sold, and they were being interviewed about their great success. And it was interesting, the quote they gave as they were being interviewed on this great day. They said this: they felt like death warmed over. This person that just sold 22 million records, or CDs, had broken all these records, had millions of dollars, and yet they felt like death warmed over at that exact moment. And that goes to a lot of times we're all searching, we're all looking for this thing that might bring us joy. A lot of times when we find it, or we think we find it, instead we find stress. It's interesting if you look at our president, President Obama. If you looked at pictures of him when he first took office, and you look at pictures of him now, think about what you would see. What I see when I see it is a man that has aged quite a bit. Now they can hide it a lot of times. Obviously they use makeup, they use different things. But he's aged quite a bit. Why does that happen? He's got the greatest job in the world, right? Everybody wants to be the president of the U.S. The reason why is because when you get there, all because you got that position does not automatically mean you're going to have joy. It automatically means you're probably going to have a lot of stress and a lot of problems, especially if you weren't a joyful person before. And because of that, it makes you age very quickly. Without Christ, nothing else matters. And that's what this gets to, is that you can have all these other things, but if you don't have them, you're not going to find true joy. You can be the president, you can sell all these albums, but without it, you won't be able to find true joy. A big change we see in his life is that he becomes from a taker to a giver. And he's an ultimate example of this. What was his job? It was to take people's money up. And we find here in the lesson that he comes from being a taker to all of a sudden he's a giver. Let's look here. Verse 7. When they saw it, they had all complained, saying, "He has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner." In verse 8, then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, I give half of my goods to the poor. And if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore it fourfold." His big change here, he goes from he's taking to now he's going to be a giver. And when he has that, when you become a giver, then all of a sudden, you become a new person. You can repent of your old ways. Because now you're able to give instead of taking. This is a big thing at the holidays. I got excited. I got some great gifts over the Christmas holidays. But the thing that gives me more joy than anything is when I get to give to my children. When I get to give to somebody else. That gives me better joy than anything that I can take. Now, that's changed over time. When I was a child, I wasn't thinking about what I'm going to give. Honestly, I couldn't earn anything really at that point to give anyone anything. But I was always worried about what I was going to get. Think about that. Your children, they were worried about what they were going to ask Santa for, right? They were wondering what they're going to get. But over time, we should become, where instead we are givers. Not takers anymore, but givers as we mature. And that's the same thing for us as Christians. And that creates a great change. So what's stopping you? Sometimes we want to become a giver. But what's stopping us? Think about that for a second. What is stopping you from being more of a giver? And I'm not just talking about giving in a monetary way in church. That's big. We need to be a giver in that way. What's stopping you from being a better giver in your daily life? Giving time to your family. Giving time to others. Giving your talents to others. For a lot of people, it would be, in this situation like him, it might be the crowd. It might be somebody that's complaining or somebody that's showing you the bad side of things. Well, it won't matter if you give anyway because no one else is. But don't let that matter. Here we find Zacchaeus listening to one person and one person only. That was Jesus. And because he listened to that one person, he was able to give like he had never given before. It will create a great change when we stop and listen to the only person that matters. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of knowledge out there. Most of you probably have a phone with you today. A lot of you probably do. On that phone, you can find a lot of knowledge, a lot of information. But the one thing we lack sometimes is wisdom. Wisdom is lacking. And the key is that we have to listen to the right source to have wisdom. If you listen to your phone, you're going to come up with all types of answers, or your computer. It was interesting the other day when a group of us were going to play laser tag. And so we were trying to find where there was a place to do that. So I asked Siri on my phone, where's the closest place we can play laser tag? And you know what my phone answered? It's great wisdom that it gave me. It said, you cannot purchase lasers. I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But I thought, maybe it thought that I was trying to produce this great laser to destroy things or something like that. But we can look to all these other sources for knowledge and things like that, but they're not going to give us true wisdom. We have to be willing to listen to God, and then we can become the giver that we need to become. So it will produce a great change. Now the next part is what happens next. Last time I was here, we talked about in the Wednesday night class about follow-up. Now a lot of times we bring someone to salvation, but a lot of times we forget there has to be something next that happens. And that's an interesting part as we look at Zacchaeus. We see the story here, the end of the verse 9 and 10. It says, and Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he also is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. When we convert, what happens next? What happens to Zacchaeus next? I really thought about this. Do we hear about Zacchaeus anywhere else in the Bible? Not really. But Josephus actually talks about, in his history, about Zacchaeus as a character. And I wasn't really aware of this until then. But there was follow-up that was done with him. There was follow-up done by those around that he needed to listen to. From all accounts here, we never have Jesus talking to Zacchaeus again. But there was follow-up done, and because of that, it changed his life. Let me just tell you the rest of the story. Later on, Peter decided to reach out to him. And Peter, when he did reach out to him, made a big impact in Zacchaeus in keeping him faithful. And because of that, Zacchaeus was an elder in the Caesarea area and was a major member of the church in that area because Peter followed up. So this is important to us, is thinking about those people around you that maybe you've talked to Jesus about. Maybe they've become interested. What follow-up have you done? I know you guys put on a big VBS here every year. VBS is great. It brings a lot of kids in from the community, people that you maybe not see as much, maybe their parents and things of that nature. But the big thing with the VBS and things like that is, what do we do after it? What type of follow-up do you have in place for that? I know at Lamar City Church of Christ, their VBS is huge. There's a lot of people that come in the doors. But a lot of times what slips through the cracks for us is, what do we do next? Because that's great to get them here and for them to learn those lessons. What happens next? Zacchaeus, that story is great about that day, about him finding salvation that day. But it wouldn't be as great if we didn't know that something else happened for him later on. How many people do you know that become Christians and then fall away? You probably know some of your friends that may have been here before, and they're not here anymore. So it's our point here for us today is to follow up with it. If we have had that change, if we're going to be that giver, we need to go out there and keep giving and finding ways to follow up with them. Different events you have here, making sure we have follow-up plans as a congregation is important. When you have things like neighbor days or homecomings, things of that nature, what do you do after? How much do we reach out to those people after they've been in those doors? That's important. So we look at Zacchaeus, that was important there as well. The rest of the story is important for all of us. What's happened after you become a Christian? What's the rest of your story after you became a Christian? Did it stop that day? Did you have a lot of joy when you just first became a Christian? And then after that, there hasn't been much to write about? It's interesting when we look at Zacchaeus. I've always wondered, it'd be cool to be written about in the Bible. I think that would be a cool thing. I feel bad for him in some ways, because we're always going to remember him for what? Because he was short. I would imagine most of us would want to be known because we were faithful or something else that we did. But hopefully you also remember not just Zacchaeus was short, but the fact that he lived the rest of his life for Christ from what we know. He followed up. He had a great rest of the story. So, in conclusion, let's look at these 5 points today. First of all, are we looking at things the way that Christ is? We have to understand he does look at things differently than many of us do. We have to always make sure that we're seeing things the way he does. Second, do we accept that way of thinking? We may know he looks at things differently, but are we willing to accept it? And then once we've looked at that, we have to understand that it's going to make a major change in our life. It has to make a change in our life. And then what's the rest of our story? Once we've had that change, what are we doing next? What's our follow-up for ourselves and for others? Today, we have the opportunity to start that journey, to make that great change. The last verse, let's look at that again. Verse 10 there, it says, "The Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost." That's still true today. His purpose today is to save the lost. We have that opportunity today. If you're not a member of the church, if you are not his, you have that opportunity today. He's seeking you today. I don't know what you need to do to climb up to meet him, but find a way to do that today. Find your way around that crowd so that you can be with him. So someday you can be with him in heaven. He's calling you by name this morning, just like he was calling Zacchaeus. If you need anything, come as we stand.